What else is going on here? Is it unrealistic to be a YouTuber as a full-time job? Good riddance to bad rubbish. Definitely just an argument in general to like stop laughing at children as a society. Hello and welcome back to the ranting room. Apparently the room that I use only to sleep and to rant, and it's the second option today. Now, I was doing a little kind of online workshop slash panel interview thing for young people about becoming a YouTuber, and like it was kind of really weird because obviously they had a chance to plan to do it and it is my full-time job completely by accident, in that nobody was doing it as a job when I started. But it got me thinking about those articles. A lot of them kind of happened about 2 years ago, but I see them circulating a lot. This kind of moral panic articles aimed at parents being like, young people want to be YouTubers. And if you think I'm exaggerating, here's the opening lines from an article in The Independent. There was a time when the height of ambition for many children was to be a fireman, a police officer, or even an astronaut. Now, in the age of influencer, it seems youngsters have other ideas, as a third of young Britons and Americans want to be vloggers. So what we've got on our hands is apparently, according to this article and some like it, all using quite dubious stats, I'd like to point out. The research pool doesn't seem big enough to me, but hey, I did an English degree, I know nothing about statistics. But it seems to be that 30% of kids want to be YouTubers, and maybe because I am one, the skin in the game is skewing my judgment and my feelings about this, but anyone in a profession, if it's actually the subject of mass hysteria and worry for parents that my child might end up like you, it doesn't hurt, but it kind of, it confuses me a bit. And the more I tried to look into it and sway myself out of it, the deeper I sunk into a swamp of confusion. So humour me, if you will. Now, if I pretend I didn't have the presumed dataless cultural context for this, when I sit down and I think, why wouldn't parents want their kids to be YouTubers, I come up with two potentially valid objections. One, it's unrealistic, and two, it's vapid. Let's go with the first one first. Now, this channel is severely and urgently waiting on some kind of probably quite shoddy video from me about my feelings about what qualifies somebody or disqualifies somebody to be middle class or working class, and how complicated that is in Britain at the moment. But bearing in mind that I don't have any data about which parents are worried and who those parents are and what class bracket they might fall into, I'm gonna go with my gut and assume that those parents are probably middle class, mainly because most of the UK is quite middle class, and because for some reason in my head the association with worrying about your child's profession and how far they're going to rise and what looks like a viable or respectable profession is something of the aspiring middle class or the presently middle class who want to climb into being upper class. So for those people, let's assume that they at least have access to a low grade webcam or some kind of video phone, therefore arguably making it possible for them to be a YouTuber, or at least start on the path to it. As you become more successful, it's more likely that you will be able to buy a better camera or invest in things. So all of that tentatively assumed, is it unrealistic to be a YouTuber as a full-time job in 2021? Now, I was thinking about this because I've just been working in an industry for like the third decade of my life that is supposed to be really hard to get into, and it is a small industry. I was working in the UK publishing industry, and according to various different articles that don't trace all their sources and there's no way of me checking all of their working, but it sounds about right to me, the UK publishing industry employs around 29,000 people. Some say 47,000. I'm assuming that's because they're counting the people who work in bookshops, but around that number. Now, how many people are full-time YouTubers in the UK? So according to this blog, which does show its workings and sounds kind of about right to me, it's 40,000 channels. So it does really interesting. They're quite comparable numbers between getting into the UK publishing industry and getting into the UK YouTube industry. whatever that means. Yeah, considering that from what it seems like there's about 180,000 channels with over 100,000 subscribers, which is, I'd say, about the ballpark you need to like make a full-time living off it. That kind of makes some sense. Final evidence pending, but we go anecdotally with what we know.
Sarah Fryer provided these stats, which this like blew my mind. I had to double check like twice to make sure that I hadn't misread this. So she says that there are more than 200 million Instagram users who have 50,000 followers. There are more than 200 million Instagram users who have at least 50,000 followers. I'm sure that that also includes a number of corporations that are not individual people, but still.
To me, that assumption that it's unrealistic either seems that maybe most people haven't updated their knowledge of like what the UK employment landscape looks like in 2021, or they don't want to look at the statistics and catch themselves up, and they want to believe that it's actually either easier to get into the UK publishing industry or harder to be a YouTuber. The other argument, I guess, is that it's vapid, which I say, well, yes, it's possible for it to be vapid, but we'll get into that in a little minute. But I'd also say that doesn't discard a lot of the more respectable professions, especially if you're only getting into them because it looks good or you want your children to get into it so that you can say to your neighbour, oh yes, actually, my son is an executive of a bank that's burning the world alive, or my son is a lawyer who defends corporate businesses as human entities to stamp on the will of the people. Or, you know, obviously be an amazing lawyer or somebody who's doing something very worthwhile in the world. But if the hesitation is that a profession is vapid, I'd argue that that's very possible in so many things. In fact, like, you could be a vapid teacher. I mean, somebody who wants to talk all day to teenagers and hear their own voice and have complete authority over younger people, you could skew that as being kind of suspicious and weird. At the same time, so many teachers are some of the most heavenly, selfless, hardworking people I know, and it's not really about them, it's all about the kids. But do you see what I mean? With any profession, you could skew it and say, like, that's quite vapid. It doesn't feel that measurable to me. So what I did want to talk about, and what I think people are missing when they're talking about these stats, is what the kids are actually saying. Like, let's listen to what those stats might be telling us. Now, I'm not the first person to say it, but as I always say, I believe that jealousy is data. And essentially what you're asking a child when you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? You're asking them, who are you jealous of? Yes. Who looks like they're having fun? Who looks fulfilled? Whose life would you like? And I think we're doing a disservice to kids when we assume it's all about the money. Although in this economy, basic necessities are at luxury prices. Really, I think something like a house, which is arguably priced at a luxury price, is a basic necessity. Recently, I've been completely reversing my acceptance of the idea of housing and property and what it means, because it's just so mad to me that you're born as a 3D person, yet there is no land that you are legally allowed to exist on without paying. Like, there's nowhere, if you don't have any money, it's basically illegal for you not to be hovering over the earth. Whether aspiring to have money is like a good and righteous and moral and socialist thing, it's at least an understandable desire from young people, if not a quite logical one, to at least have some money and some backup. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this aspiration for kids to want a life that provides an independent amount of money, however independence is interpreted. I don't know if it is really that independent to be a YouTuber, but this kind of idea is because kids and young people do get a sense of the world. Like, they're not stupid, they kind of, like, at least even if they don't know the numbers, they get a sense of it. And in a world where you kind of have to have like £500,000 to be able to own a house that you can't get evicted from, i.e. like outright own it, I still don't completely know whether I believe that having a mortgage is really owning a house, because at the end of the day, if you lose your job and you can't pay the mortgage, it is still kind of the bank's. You do still get kicked out. So to have like £500,000 to buy a house and have kids, like that's how much it costs in modern day Britain. And if a teenager hears that they need an extraordinary amount of money to do incredibly mundane things, they're gonna think that they need an extraordinary kind of job. But assuming it's not just about the money, what else is going on here? Why do all these kids want to be YouTubers? Well, we can but guess, but the way that Britain is set up at the moment and has been for several decades, I'm going to assume that most kids haven't grown up seeing their parents have a particularly fulfilling working life. That's assuming that the economy was able to provide them with a job at all. So through no fault of the parents, but when you are modelled misery and told that that is what your school is training you towards, can you see why it's not a great sell? Can you see why maybe the appeal of self-employment, and if you don't like move in particularly avant-garde or entrepreneurial circles, the only example of a self-employed person, a self-determining person, at least in their eyes, is a YouTuber. That's the closest thing they can come to meeting or seeing what that kind of life might be like, or what that kind of way of earning money would be like. And as I talked about in this video, often the aspiration to earn money and be self-determining isn't really often the fantasy of luxury, it's the fantasy of having enough. But also beyond that, YouTubers are people that other people seem to visibly listen to. So when a child says I want to be a YouTuber, they're often saying I want to be listened to, in the same way that when I was a kid I wanted to be a traveling theatre person, or at one point I wanted to be a vet, I wanted to be a writer, and that was kind of because I wanted I knew that I didn't want to attend an office. Ironically, I did end up attending an office for a very, very long time, and Leena had a lot of stupid opinions as a child, but on that she was spot on. But that idea of not living a conventional life, or something that's a little bit more malleable, a little bit more free, even though under the guise of capitalism, being a YouTuber means that you are definitely still owned in some way by the man, it's just a different structure. But maybe the point towards people wanting to be YouTubers, or translation maybe have more creative careers, is because this myth of a stable job, a job that will be faithful to you, that you'll have a job for life, just isn't a reality. And kids aren't stupid, they know that. Even for me, I think a big shock for me was working for these companies and working loads of unpaid overtime, feeling like I was giving them a lot of my personal resources as well as my professional resources, but believing that it would be because the company would look after me and, you know, it'd all like kind of even out in the end and stuff like that. And then seeing so many people who had given everything and were incredibly talented at their jobs get made redundant for no reason, even though a company was in profit, really shook that idea deeper into me. Like, I kind of knew that. There's so many kids that will have witnessed, especially during COVID, their parents being abandoned by their industries, by their employers. So that kind of financial dependence, or at least that kind of not such a close tie to the whims of the economy, is kind of smart. It might not be possible for all of them, but if that's what they're actually trying to say, or at least some of their anxieties around getting a normal job versus becoming a YouTuber, that's something that's worth talking about, surely. Like, why, instead of parents being like, why does my child want to be a YouTuber? I'm like, but why do we live in a society that makes what you do look so unappealing? And when they're at that age where they can dream of themselves as anything, they're also capable of dreaming of the workplace in a different way, of dreaming of a society that works in a different structure. And that's something that my generation and older can definitely learn from, being able to imagine the end of capitalism. What a gift. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the part in the video where I am completely running out of camera angles to use. So here we are on the floor where I belong, trash. But yeah, in some ways, to be fair, even though some of my income still comes from obviously Google, some of it comes from subcontracting and freelancing and stuff in my own time, but some of it, a lot of it comes from people tipping me for these videos. Thank you. A community of people on Patreon who are supporting this work. And I suppose without the possibility of not having any boss and being completely self-determining, which is kind of like impossible given how far we are into the setup of humanity and capitalism at this point, me having, instead of one boss who, because of unenforced employment law and the general tone of most industries, can exploit me whenever they like, versus me having 2,000 bosses who all genuinely care about my well-being. Now that sounds a little bit like socialism. Well, not completely, but do you see what I'm getting at? There was this great interview I was listening to on the Outrage and Optimism podcast with Aurora, who is an amazing musician and climate activist, and she talked about how often kids are told that they can't change the world when they're when they're kids, like how they're so often reminded of how small they are. Not just that, oh, you can't be famous, or you can't become like a famous pop star. Because by the way, also I think like a lot of this is just replaced. Like when I was a kid, of course I wanted to be a pop star. Could I play any instruments or learn any dance routines or do any of it? No, but that didn't spoil the fun of the dream. I think a lot of these things were like kids wanting to be lawyers. I'm like, who are your kids? Like, do they what? I think it's quite normal for kids to want to be pop stars or people like that. I don't think that's weird. I think that's a normal part of like growing up. But I think there's also this thing of an individualistic attitude that we talk about when we ask kids what they want to be. When you say like, oh, you can't be that, it's actually kind of also saying you're not that important. You can't even be part of changing something. You can't even be one of the people of a team who change something or are listened to. And I think that's what's scary. YouTubers are listened to. They're people that have more of a platform than most people. Maybe too much of a platform, some might say. But I think what I worry about with these parents who are in the comments of these articles, I'm kind of like, I really hope that you're not also accidentally telling your children back in your box, you know? I just wish that some of those journalists, when they were writing the articles, would have actually interviewed some of the children and asked them, which YouTubers would you like to be like? Because if they'd come back and they'd answered like frivolous ones, I still wouldn't be worried about them. But if they'd come back and they'd said like, I want to be like Khadija or Tiffany or ContraPoints, I would say the kids are all right. And also, have you heard of a career called lecturing? There are so many YouTubers who are incredibly academic, incredibly thoughtful. They have a very specific skill at something. They're showcasing a particular kind of close friendship, which is aspirational and good. And even if they're not watching that stuff at the moment, maybe they've just started on the soft stuff, the daily vloggers or whatever. It kind of also reminds me of that thing that's like, what is tacky when poor people do it and chic when rich people do it? I think there could be another one that's like, what is anxiety inducing and terrifying when kids do it, but totally fine when adults do it? Watching other people live. It's fine if you're reading a bit of literary fiction that's just about lives, or listening to one of the shittest radio programs that is just all about people's lives. It's fine if you've got an art installation in a window and it's like sponsored by the Tate. But if you're watching vloggers, then no, that's a problem. I feel like this rant needs a summary, otherwise we could be here for a very, very long time. What I have gone to great length, medium length, to say in this video is that the kids are probably all right. I don't want to toot my own trombone, but I really hope that you don't hate the idea of your kid ending up like me in any way. I mean, I'm a bit shambolic, but I'm not the worst, you'd hope. And I think what I've learned in the past couple of years is I've had these jobs where like you can go to a Christmas party and people are impressed, you know? They're like, oh, you do that? There? For those people, you sell your labor to that man and you get like the wow factor. But actually for me, being a YouTuber isn't very socially respected outside of the internet bubble. In fact, people give you quite weird looks and make some really kind of like borderline offensive assumptions about what you do every day. For me, it's weird to experience that shift in perception of my job when actually I know day to day I'm actually kind of doing quite similar stuff to what I was doing when I was working for companies. It's just that I get to make more of the decisions. I have way more fun. I also have a lot more of responsibility. It's much more risky, but I'm sure you've all experienced this a little bit when people misunderstand what your job is. In the day-to-day mechanisms of them, they're not that different. And I'm really lucky to be able to do that. Again, like, huge disclaimer if you haven't watched my channel before, hopefully it'll be obvious, but I'm not somebody I'm not trying to be like, everyone should be a YouTuber, because I'm aware that it takes a huge amount of specific skills, it took me 11 years to do this, and then also just a lot of for a better word, privilege. I am incredibly lucky to be here, and I think there's a really good financial diet video that talks about the kinds of privileges that aren't to do with money or class, but the kind of privileges you have in having parents who are like, go for it, you can be anything, I'm not gonna laugh at you for the things that you want to do, I want to ask you more questions about it. And I think that's definitely one of the privileges I had, because my parents didn't laugh at me when I was a kid and I suggested all these different things I was going to be. And I think there's definitely just an argument in general to like stop laughing at children as a society. But it's also the idea of coming around, or the media coming around to this reminder that we no longer not only inherit our jobs or our careers from our parents, we often work, and this is going to continue to happen, work in jobs that didn't exist when adults were asking us what we wanted to do with our lives. And the death of the respectability profession, so doing a profession purely for the respectability of it rather than for the actual like love of it or the cultivation of the skill of it or the money. If that kind of career aspiration is going out the window, I say good riddance to bad rubbish. In summary, I just hope that soon we live in a world where journalists and parents stop asking kids, who would you like to sell your labour to? And ask them more, which of my mistakes would you not like to repeat? No, I'm joking. More like, what would you like to change? What world would you like to live in when you're 30? Like, what do you believe in? What would you like to get better at? There's so many better questions out there, and I guess it's not my frustration at the questions that are being asked, but all the ones that aren't, that I would like to see. Anyway, if you like this video, why? No, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the Gumption Club, my 2,000 odd bosses that treat me very nicely. Thank you. Here are some more videos, you might want to watch them. I don't know, I'm not the boss of you, nor should anyone be, but we're working on it. Subscribe if you'd like to be here again. Frog Snog out.